Welcome back, everyone. This is theCUBE studio in Palo Alto. I'm John Furrier, host of theCUBE. We're here for a special presentation. theCUBE plus NYSE Wired Community presents our Silicon Valley. Host here is theCUBE and NYSE and the East Coast together, connecting Wall Street and Silicon Valley. Bill Tai is here, venture capitalist, also part of Acti founder, community, ACTAI is the acronym, Acti Global. Bill, great to see you again. It's been a while since you've been on theCUBE.
Thank you, John.
2018, pre-COVID, during the whole crypto revolution.
That continues.
That continues, 100,000 plus Bitcoin.
It's stepping up.
A lot of people looking good there.
Yeah.
You know, good to see that community. How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
So AI of Innovators, is appropriate that you're here. One is your leadership in the community has been phenomenal, and people who know you know what you're doing. But also, they might not know that you're an amazing tech investor and have great pedigree. One of the early employees at TSMC.
Yeah.
You've seen the revolution of the computer industry, and you're kind of also a historian, but also still investing, and you're all part of your community. We're in this wave again. It reminds me of the computer revolution.
Sure.
And I want to get your thoughts on this, because when you saw that computer revolution, of which you were a part of, covering and being a player in, it's got all the same window dressing, but it's bigger. And you get the internet wave, and now the Gen AI wave. So much change is afoot.
It's remarkable. I think we've gone from the era, so for a little background, I started in the Valley in the mid-'80s when it was still mostly orchards, and the dominating tiny companies that were dominating tech at the time, you know, Intel, National, AMD, had all come out of Fairchild. And I joined the CEO of Fairchild at the startup of LSI Logic. And interestingly enough, Jensen Huang, who is a relative of mine, he was there with me, you know, and he went off to start NVIDIA, and I helped the government of Taiwan start TSMC. Yeah. But that era was really about creating lower friction form factors to move electrons around. And people may or may not remember, even in that era, if you had a TV or a radio that broke, mostly TVs actually, you'd take off the back and look inside, and in the back were a bunch of things that looked like light bulbs. Yeah. And you'd take them to the drugstore and plug them in to find the match, and you'd order one of these vacuum tubes from General Electric or something like that. But the integration of the silicon allowed a lot of logic to be put very densely into parts that led to the creation of the computer and communications networks, which then were stuck onto the phone system to digitize it, that then helped facilitate what we know today as the internet. And I think we moved from moving electrons to moving bits representing information. And of course, Google was the organizer of the world's information. Now we're entering an age, I think, where we're moving from the information and access to the information to the context. So what is the semantic web, which Tim Berners-Lee used to talk about a long time ago, which is not just the information, but the knowledge and the distillation of what that information means. And it unlocks a whole new powerful wave that it literally is going to touch everything we do.
Yeah, and I love that perspective of looking at the early days of the computer industry, because those breakthroughs set generations to come. And then we're building on now an open source culture with software that's expanding and continuing to live through. And now we're at this golden age, this renaissance of the old kind of computer systems, big iron thinking with all these clustered systems. You mentioned NVIDIA. Yep. If you look at what's happening in the high performance computing era of the past 5 years, it's now an AI world where supercomputing is being democratized. This is one of Jensen's big talking points. Yes. We're generating the future, it's not pre-programmed. So now we're at this new frontier. What do you see out there? Because in a way, there's some similarities, but differences, but the scale's bigger. There seems to be this next kind of generational, multi-generational enablement coming. Yeah,
there's a massive structural shift occurring, obviously, because of the compute power that is enabled now by silicon in dense building structures, obviously called data centers. And it is reminiscent a little bit of kind of the mid-'90s, 95 to 2002 or so. There was a gigantic wave of infrastructure put up to run the internet. And you might remember that brief period in 1999, 2000, where
the bubble.
Yeah, at the peak of the bubble, interestingly, I remember looking up the top 5 tech companies that had gotten to what seemed like a very large number at the time, 500 billion in market cap. Microsoft, Intel, Oracle, Sun, and I forgot the fifth one.
Yahoo.
But yeah,
Maybe it might have been Yahoo.
yeah, I don't think it got to 500.
Okay.
But those were the giants of the day, and then obviously that kind of deflated a bit. But you know, we're in this mode now where because the infrastructure build is a very dense revenue placement for other things to run on, it's all kind of upfront, and we're in that wave now with NVIDIA. The world has never seen a company growing at the scale of NVIDIA, roughly 30 billion a quarter now, with something like 75% net cash flow. Growing at 100% year over year.
Yeah, those margins are incredible.
Never happened before.
Hardware company, but they have software too. So
yes.
What's the impact of that? Because again, there's multiple threads here. One is the innovation on the enablement of the user experience, society, humanity, Earth, and then there's does it even be able to run? Do we have the power?
This is a
run?
big question, because there's another vector that has fed into that without people really, it's kind of crept up on people. So obviously this whole open source world of Bitcoin, or currency, so to speak, the mining infrastructure that has been put in place to support that ecosystem has grown tremendously over the years. And because of the heavy competitive dynamic in that industry and the need for really, really high performance compute, the Bitcoin mining industry really led the way with a lot of the techniques that are now being put into regular, if you call it regular computation. But everything from the way data centers are designed, the power density, the cooling systems with immersion cooling, all that stuff was in place in the Bitcoin mining industry 6 or 7 years ago. And now I think if you look at the data centers that traditionally had been x86 style data centers, now moving to GPU clusters. In probably 1995 to 2000, you would build a data center so that each 6-foot rack would be fed by a power feed of about 15 kilowatts. It stayed like that for maybe 8 years, 9 years, and then it jumped to 25. Which seems like a big jump percentage-wise, 40% or so. It was like that for maybe another 10 years. If you look at the data centers that are being spec'd today, many of them are being designed for 300 kilowatts per 6-foot rack, up from 15 jumping to 25. Now you've got 300, some 500. And so if you combine that little space at 300 to 500 kilowatts, put it in a big building, a lot of the data centers now are being spec'd for 300 megawatts per building, some scalable to 500 megawatts. If you take all of the data centers announced, funded, planned to be built out in the next 5 years, the energy consumption is equivalent to about 40 million American homes. And
that's on projected new data centers.
It's finalized, like already
total
committed.
Data centers or
committed.
Net new?
The ones that are announced, funded, ready to go, and actually in process. And there's more that are being announced that are not in that number. But the 40,
so the 40 million homes equivalent, so finish the thought.
Yeah, 40 million homes worth of energy, where there's about 100 million American homes that took many, many, many decades to build. So there's like a 40% step up in just energy consumption required in 5 years. And it's obvious that we don't have that, which is why you see the hyperscalers basically committing to bring back 3 Mile Island, which basically failed. They'd rather fix it than build fresh. And you see others like Meta and others now committing to nuclear.
I interviewed the head of facilities at Amazon Web Services, that reInvent, and he says, we're thundering away, we're not stopping, and they're deploying more and more. That's on the Amazon side. He did talk about nuclear on that side, so it's a little bit safer, but still, to your point, the power envelopes have changed. So, and
also not just the power envelope, also the nature of the power. So people familiar with what happened in the internet era know that the phone companies basically went from circuit switched, like imagine a wire connecting calls, to packet switch. So you could multiplex with packets of information with headers and footers that would merge and distill information. If you look at what's going to happen to the power grid, it was originally like telephone networks, built on a centralized model where you burn some hydrocarbons, boil water, turn turbines, and then feed, kind of like a cable network. Now you have on the endpoints heterogeneous sources that are very lumpy. So whether it's solar, it's up during the day, down at night, wind, which is like quite variable. And all of these things are now coming into the endpoint. So imagine like a cable network where you're trying to push video up into the endpoints to have them come out the other side. It's a totally different architecture. So I think the entire grid is going to be rebuilt over the next 30 years in America.
Well, let's pause for a second. I want to just unpack that, because that is huge. Let's go back a little bit about the Bitcoin vector, because I think that's something that's interesting too, that you brought up. The competition now, Bitcoin's not going away. It's 100 and something thousand now. I don't know, it's close today, yesterday.
Yeah, 106 last I looked this morning, yeah.
It's well above its peak, but that's not going away.
No.
If anything, it's going to be even more demand.
I think it's becoming firmly rooted now, finally.
Yeah, I think it's a done deal, my mind. MicroStrategy made a good bet.
Yeah.
So, Les and the team, good job. But that needs to support an ecosystem.
Yes.
That's not going away. So the congestion and contention on data centers, to your point, 40 million homes, that's just uncommitted, not future.
That's correct.
Okay, so now that's a problem. We'll put that on the side for a second. Now back to the grid. What in your mind do you see when you talk to folks around just the ideation around how do you solve the grid re-architecture?
Yeah.
Is there strategies? What's some of the thought leading areas people are riffing on around grid? So grid computing back in the day was a term in the 90s.
Yeah.
And now we're back to grid construction and computing.
Yeah.
What is the future of the grid?
So as I described earlier, we moved from making pieces of silicon that could steer electrons locally to representing bits with electrons to move them through a phone network. Now we're going back to how do you move electrons in a gigantic context-aware cloud where you have awareness of what the endpoints are, where they are logically, and then how to route the electricity inside. So I think what we're going to see is something that is a software-based solution enhanced by AI that adds intelligence to a living network. So if you think about what happened to phone companies in the transition to the internet and things like email, before you would have a point-to-point call and you had awareness of the line from one phone call to another phone call, and so the rest of the network was kind of dead to you. When you moved to TCP/IP and packet switching, you then had a cloud that knew every endpoint, whether it was being used or not. It had an identity, and you could route information from any point to any point. So I think what's got to happen is that the electrical packets, the electrons themselves in an envelope like you would represent an email, are going to have some sort of a intelligence layer on it, a protocol, which allows the source, say like it's coming off of a solar grid. It pushes those electrons into the grid. The output's got to come out somewhere when it gets used, or it gets stored. And so where it is at any one time, the whole system has to know, and that's going to be an intelligence, an AI thing.
Yeah, and I think that's a great comparison, going full circle to your point about the computer revolution on a small scale.
Yeah.
And I think, speaking of protocols, which key word there is protocol. Remember TCP, we all know what that did, created the open systems revolution.
Yes.
And that was just unleashed massive innovation and wealth creation and innovation. But remember, there was also another protocol, UDP. Which could send packets and then assemble them at the fly. So when you have this kind of open system, protocols can ride on top for efficiency or use cases. And so this kind of like, we hope is a tell sign. Is there any advances in your mind, or is a group of people talking about this?
Yeah, I did back a company called Power Ledger, which it is that intelligence layer. So they basically have a software layer that attaches to smart meters. So that, in a town like, where do you live here in Menlo?
Palo Alto.
Palo Alto. So in Palo Alto, if you put a solar panel on your house and you're generating electricity, and let's say you were Bitcoin mining at home. I'm making that up, but let's say
Don't tell anyone.
Yeah. So
Palo has their own power source.
Yeah. So let's say you're running a miner, and I don't know what Palo Alto electricity is, but I'm guessing at peak it's probably 25 cents a kilowatt hour, something like that. Okay. So your neighbor. Or your neighbor might be mining, so it's not you. Your neighbor might be mining.
A friend.
Yes, and paying.
I have a friend who's mining.
And having to pay the power company 25 cents a kilowatt hour. You may have solar panels on your roof that are pushing electrons into the system that the power company is paying you 5 cents a kilowatt hour. I don't know what they pay you, but it's going to not be very much. Why can't you sell your 5 cent a kilowatt hour, or what would have generated 5 cents, for 15 cents to your neighbor, right? Because you're on the same line. So it's a software question. It's basically, how do you have a software agent on each one of those things?
It's the Napster of energy.
That's it, peer-to-peer. It's how do you have peer-to-peer sourcing and usage of electricity in a system where everyone's pushing electrons onto a grid.
Yeah, this is a modernization thing, and this seems to be the theme of our generation. As we're at that, again, I love how the lessons we've been through, but it's at another scale. When you have your ACTI meetups with the community, you have a lot of smart people get together, and have fun. Obviously, kite surfing, everyone that sees an awesome time. But you guys do a lot of seminars and salons. What's the thought? What's the melting pot of ideation? What are some of the big minds thinking about right now in terms of, because you have a confluence of people.
Yeah. Well, there's so many different subjects. I'd say the thing that has been on my mind for a while, even back to 2018 when we were, but was it Bahamas?
Bahamas, yeah, Polygon.
Bahamas, yeah. If you think about the structural changes to the monetary system, that's big. I'd say there's two general areas that I'm focused on now, which are healthcare and the monetary system. And I guess the monetary system, it's a bigger thing, but let's start with that.
Yeah, I love that area too. You know that.
Yeah, it's crazy. So, obviously, fiat, there hasn't been a fiat currency in the history of the world that has lasted more than a couple hundred years. The American currency system, it was from kind of the Bretton Woods from the 40s until 72 gold standard, and then it broke. So they had to decouple, and we also all know the term petrodollar. So as you think about what is currency, currency is essentially either something that was reflective of a store of value like a chunk of gold. Another way to look at it is it's a unit of stored productivity, right? So if everyone worked only to the amount they consumed every day, there would be no excess. You would not need to have savings. But if you work more than you consume, you have extra chits, so to speak, to spend on other stuff. So that's currency. So the nature of currency shifted from a store of value model to stored energy in hydrocarbon molecules, right? So once the UK and the USA forced the Middle East to accept dollars as the pricing for oil, any country that wanted to preserve their economy would have to basically either store barrels of oil or store US dollars as a proxy for that oil. So the US
and there's risk associated with both.
Yes. But the US dollar, as a result, occupied this very special reserve currency status where so much of it is packed away in these countries, storing it up so they can buy oil, that the supply doesn't flood the market. Otherwise, you don't know what would happen if all the stored US dollars and treasuries just gushed onto the market. Where would the dollar go, right? There's not enough demand. So anyway, but it's a
plummet.
Yeah, it's got this special place. But I think over the last 30, 40 years, creeping up on us has been a fundamental shift in the nature of productivity. So I say this in some of my talk, which is if somebody asked you right now to either give up your car or give up your computers and phones, what would you keep? You would keep these because this is how you're productive. So I think we're at a point where all marginal productivity is coming.
You wouldn't let me answer that question because you know I might keep the car.
Okay. Well, maybe it's a Tesla.
I'm only kidding.
Maybe it's a Tesla. Anyway, the
smart car.
Yes, it's
programmable.
It is. They're all becoming that way.
Okay.
But I think the notion,
the value earning is here.
It is
with this product.
Yeah. And productivity is coming from these devices, and I think we're moving to a world where stored productivity isn't so much in hydrocarbon molecules anymore, it's in electrons, right? So if you think about what is Bitcoin, Bitcoin is basically stored excess electricity that you can, cash out for other electricity. It's a form of a battery if in a conceptual sense. And I think if you look at, for example, in 1990, the Fortune 10, 7 or 8 of the Fortune 10 were oil-based companies, or indirectly, like car companies or oil companies. If you look at, for example, it's a little bit apples to oranges, but look at the Mag 7 today, or if you look at the top 10 market cap companies in the world, only one is an oil company. So we've gone through this shift where we've moved from a hydrocarbon marginal productivity economy to electrons, and we're right in that inflection point right now.
It shows the value. Obviously, those companies are CapEx data center companies, data companies, productivity enablers. I was once interviewing someone on theCUBE, and they said AI scales intellect.
Yeah.
And so what's your reaction to that as you look at productivity and the human?
Yeah.
The human, preserving humanity.
Sure.
Human in the loop is the word today. Human in the loop today translates in the future to what? Human in the driver's seat? Human augmented? What's your vision on this?
It's basically an aggregate. AI presents an ability to put aggregate knowledge of humanity or a large number of people into an individual's brain. And it's not exactly like this, but you know, in the Matrix. So there's that, that scene in the where Keanu Reeves is, getting shot at.
Dodging the bullets, slow motion. Bullets are going slow. He's just
and then he jumps in the helicopter, and he doesn't yet know how to fly it, but programs start loading in his head, right? So that's kind of a proxy for what AI kind of is, right? So if you think about, I've had some companies launch very early things, like Canva did a deal with OpenAI and launched Canva GPT well before this giant, wave of consumer stuff. There was a stick figure drawing that I think represents what that is, or AI to the individual. Imagine a big boulder and a tiny stick figure trying to push that boulder. And that's the individual. And then if you imagine a giant stick figure with their hands at the top, able to push it, that's AI. Because in Canva's case, they have 200 million designs being done a month. And so billions of those a year. So
nice investment, by the way.
Thank you. So you can take, billions of people's knowledge and distill that into one person's head. So that person can now just type out, I want a restaurant menu for a Southeast Asian restaurant with 25 items, whatever, and it just draws off of prior work that's similar, and boom, you have it. So the productivity increase is massive.
By the way, that's a great example of the Jensen Huang generative. That was not pre-programmed. It's not in a database somewhere. That was a runtime generative prompt. That assembled and shipped
instantly
in real time.
So
that's a category change. Computer industry.
And Google, obviously an important dominating company that will have a big role in AI, but if you think about how you traditionally use Google, you find the information and then you would have to go and do it yourself. Now it's done for you. So you're moving again from information to the context of the information and the distilled result.
Bill, you're such a great guest to have on theCUBE. I mean, we could go another hour. Your masterclass will still go a little longer because I want to ask you about entrepreneurship and the ecosystem around innovation, not just from a wealth creation standpoint, because that's a side effect of being in the arena and or making good bets. But you've seen many waves of innovation. You participated in them. Entrepreneurship is kind of the same but different. It's always kind of the same. Opportunity recognition. People brave enough to go after opportunities that they see. Sometimes they're crazy when they see it. And they have to keep that to themselves. Or if they're like me, they'll say it out loud and then be called crazy. But that's the classic case. But the environments change. In your history, you've seen a lot of the formations. Today, we're living in an era where there's new things we've never seen before. You mentioned some of the things that are going on in the world. One, cloud is inexistent. That's an economic force. Amazon, Google, Facebook, Facebook's the next Google. It's all there, large scale. It's like the telephone company on steroids. Ready to work. What is the entrepreneurial equation? And now you have network effects where obviously theCUBE and the NYSE are rolling out this first generation of the NYSE wired network. That's Brian Bauman's effort. Network effects have been around for a while, but when you start getting intelligence and data, that stick lever, the rock, you're starting to see data and people come together. You have a very successful network in your community. You've been doing this. So network effects, cloud, data, AI, and now old school networking.
Communities are back in vogue. It's interesting. If you think about what, when the early internet came out, you had these organizations, I don't know if you call them an organization, The Well and Usenet, news groups.
The Edge or what were they called? All these different groups. They're a bulletin board community.
Basically.
Converted into public.
People that couldn't find people like themselves physically in their neighborhood, so they would come online and they would either stumble across or be directed to other groups that were like them, so that they had a way to have similar interests and express their similar interests around subjects that were interesting to them. A lot of them were medical things, rare diseases, things like that. But I think we're in a supernova period for that kind of behavior, because if you think about the size of market, I can still remember, I think in the early 90s, before the internet hit, big companies in software selling 5-inch floppy disks were lucky to have 1 to 2 million customers a year. That was a big number, because there were only 20 million PCs sold a year. So having 5 or 10% market share was huge. Huge. Yeah. And so companies like Lotus 123, I don't know if it was still around there, but companies like Lotus 123, WordPerfect, they were giants of their day.
Shrink wrap package software.
Yeah, with 1 million customers a year, and price points that were very high, because you had to support the developer. Now you have instant reach, and you have products like ChatGPT or Threads that when they come out, it's 100 million users in a matter of days or weeks. Yeah. So we have a market size that is 2 to 3 orders of magnitude larger than it was, with a reach that doesn't have to be physical distribution. It's all accelerating.
You bring up a good point there. PC volumes at that time, again, small numbers, but the online population increased with more penetration.
Yes.
Classic market.
And now it's billions.
Now, mature market. Online internet, remember? The online population, Barry Meeker used to go up there every Morgan Stanley and say, online populations grew 10% this year.
Yes.
20 million.
Yes.
Okay, wow, huge number. But okay, so penetration of laptops, phones, all penetrate devices, billions. What's the next breakthrough that will have that same onboarding-like dynamic, where it's embryonic, and then the growth of adoption or penetration is a key factor in its success, like the PC, like the internet? Is that...
Are you talking about hardware or software?
Or anything. I think it's generative AI, personally. I think it's the onboarding of something, the population usage connects to that.
I think it is something in the AI space. And I guess ChatGPT is kind of a proxy for it, because there hasn't been a product that has grown that fast in a long time. Right. And I think as the quality of applications gets better, I think there's going to be sub-markets that just, because people have access so quickly, the penetration rate will go nuclear quicker.
Bill, it's great to have you on theCUBE, and I know you're super busy. I appreciate you spending the time and sharing your insights with the community. For the next minute, let's talk about what you're working on. Put a plug in for ACT Global, ACTI Global. You got events, you got cool people around you, you're growing a community, you have missions. Put a plug in, some of the activities and the people you're working with.
Yeah, ACTI Global, just so people know what that name is, it's an acronym for Athletes, Conservationists, Technologists, Artists, Innovators. And it's a eclectic, interesting mix. It started as a bunch of kiteboarding techies from Silicon Valley that would go to Maui every year and just kite together. But over time, our functions got a little bit bigger and deeper, and people started, because they were all kind of creating companies, they would start to show each other their products and what they were building. Canva got basically put together on a kite trip. We launched Zoom when it was a year old on a kite trip. So
you'll try anything.
No, and that's true. People that kiteboard have that attitude. They are willing to try. So I think, and they're willing to fund those companies.
By the way, that's the tastemaker alpha originators, because Canva, obvious now, not obvious then. Zoom struggled early on.
Oh, the first 4 years, really hard,
Okay, so what? So cool environment. Okay, what else?
But obviously, people that kiteboard, they're used to failing all the time and getting back up and going.
Fit right in.
Yes, because you can't. There's so many variables. It's a multivariate equation. You just got to keep at it. So they make for great entrepreneurs. And I think when you get a whole bunch of them in the same place that listen to each other's, sparkly ideas, the funding will flow and people will join the project.
And they have different perspectives too. You get the mix, it's a melting pot of skilled, creative, smart people. Okay, so what's the coolest thing you did this year?
As a group?
No, or just you group and
projects
or surfing in the Arctic or climbing Mount Everest. What have you like?
2 weeks ago, a bunch of us were just in Australia. kiting a bunch of places, but Woodman Point and Safety Bay. We have a snow kite group coming up in St. Moritz in 3 weeks. We're going to hit an island in the Philippines in February. So we have 4 or 5 things. We did a longevity function. I'd say if there's a new thing that everybody in our community is really interested in, it's health span. So it's not just living longer, but how do you stay active and healthy for a long,
biohacking, or just more like lifestyle changes, or
all of the above. That's also a very multifaceted area, because it's not just one thing that keeps you healthy for a long time. It's a combination of food as medicine, or better diet, consistency in exercise. It's lowering your stress. Sometimes some people believe in supplements, some don't. There's amazing changes, I think, coming in the medical field. And obviously this is a pain point for everybody. The medical field, it is so broken. My older sister, she's a doctor, and in the 80s and 90s, she liked her private practice. It was very nice, and then it got rolled up into an HMO. And now the doctors are measured on throughput.
And become institutionalized.
And it's there are units of gross margin generators. So doctors do not like practicing anymore, so people aren't entering the field, so there's a shortage of doctors. The reimbursement system obviously is kind of messed up and resulted in the execution of the United Healthcare CEO. But I think that's an area that is totally ripe for AI. So if you think about the aggregate knowledge description that I had before, if you can empower an individual doctor with everything that everyone else in the history of the world in medicine had diagnosed or decided was what was needed from a certain diagnosis, you'll put a lot of power and efficiency into that doctor that might make a dent in the healthcare system going forward, because it needs it. If there's a system
my
that
daughter
needs it.
Caroline just took a job at One Medical, which is part of Amazon, and she's working on the Edge case with HealthScribe.
Yep.
And the mistakes doctors make in the Edge just on handwriting.
Right.
Just the inbound logistics of the data affects all these downstream consequences. Follow-up care, reimbursement. I mean, you solve that problem.
Yes. Because a little insurance miscoding, that can put your reimbursement into a black hole and get somebody pissed off enough to take a bus or whatever he did to New York City to go after somebody. It's like there's a lot of stuff that's got to get fixed.
It's a system that needs a shock.
Yeah, and the stats are mind-boggling. There are 100 million people in America saddled with medical debt. There's 315 million people. 1 out of 3 Americans have medical debt. It's 19% of the GDP of healthcare in general, and 66% of all bankruptcies every year in America are from medical debt. So the incentive systems today are totally broken and have to get fixed.
Yeah, that's AI could come in. This is where, because they have data, they have systems. Now, granted, they might be in silos, but we get that straightened out.
And I'm working on. I have a company called Dyad.net that looks very promising, and I took the CTO and data science team out of Cambridge Analytica, just as they had hit the wall. And super talented people. They were not in charge of the product or business decisions. They just built the AI engine that helped sway.
What other investments you have going on? You mind sharing a few of them?
Happy to.
Your hot ones, your favorite ones?
Yeah, I'd say this one, Dyad.net. I think because of, unfortunately, what happened with the CEO of United Healthcare, there's a huge demand wave now for anything that can make insurance miscodings not gum up the system, or more appropriate diagnosis so that things get reimbursed and don't go into the black hole. And that's kind of what they do. There's a fun little company called MagicHour.ai that
sounds great.
I couldn't believe it. Like every once in a decade, maybe once in a decade, I'll fund something where I put money in and they never needed it. So this company, by the time I wired, was profitable, and they've never had to touch any of the money I put in there. But
hey, keep the shares. Let's say keep the cash.
Yes.
Don't send the monny back.
Yeah. So that one's kind of interesting. Lars Rasmussen and I, Lars and I helped put together the team at Canva. We funded a young Harvard doctor named Jenny Shao, she's created an AI therapist. You know, and my sister, the doctor, she said oftentimes she'll have a patient that has a hard.
What's the name of that company?
It's called Robin Health.
I think I interviewed her on NYSC.
Oh, could be, yes.
They do the avatar where you can check in.
Yes.
Yes, they were on theCUBE at NYSC in the East Coast.
Yeah, so my sister, the doctor, when she has a patient with physical issues, often that leads to some mental, kind of weakness and need to talk to somebody. Yes, and it takes her 3 to 4 months to line up a therapist. And then oftentimes when they meet, there's not a chemical match.
It's an inboarding thing. Yeah, it's terrible.
Yes.
Like, tell me basic stuff.
Yeah, so emotionally intelligent AI is
awesome.
Is a good thing that's low friction. You know, I think I always tell my companies when I back them that a certain kind of company, digital companies, that the things that they have to solve a problem, make it low friction, replicable, scalable. If you do those 3 things, that's Canva, that's Zoom, and that is what the companies that I mentioned are all striving for. Fix a problem, but make it low friction, replicable, scalable. And then once you get product market fit, then you step on the gas.
What a bonus, extra overtime masterclass right there, the 3 things.
That's it. That's all I have them do. Replicate, scale.
Replicate, scale. Yeah. Bill, great to have you on.
Thank you.
West Coast in our studio. Great to see you. Bill Tighe here in the house. theCUBE plus the NYSC global community really kind of putting together East Coast, West Coast connection of open source content and great minds, great network. I'm John Furrier, theCUBE. Thanks for watching.